Hi, my name is Reuben. In this series of videos, I walk you through the sample Pool Doctors application that I developed for the introduction of Gennaro Mobile. In this video, I look at the subject of data synchronization. So in our application, if we run it, we'll see this icon here. This it's like refresh, the reverse arrow. If we click on that, that's going away and talking to our database servers, and it's doing some database synchronization. What it does is it downloads any new jobs that have been loaded. It refreshes the product and customer tables, uploads any jobs that I've completed, and deletes old jobs. So what I've set it up to do is delete jobs that are more than 7 days old from my device. Okay, so there's that's where the bulk of the synchronization is occurring. What I've also got is in the settings application, I've got this ability to create a random job, and that's making a web service call to my service to create a new job number 118, and then next time I do a synchronization, that job should be downloaded onto my device. So there we are, one new job loaded, and if I go and look at my jobs, change the order so the newest one's at the top, I should see job number 118 there. So that's creating a new, that's just something I've put in for development purposes to basically simulate a new job coming into the call center, and then everything else flows on down from that. So all the synchronization is occurring inside jobsync.4gl, and I'll just work my way through them. So that create random job, the first thing it does is test if we're connected. How are we testing we're connected? Basically, it's a little I forget. Oh no, it's in the bottom of this function. Disconnected. It's a little function call which basically does a front call to get the IP address, and if the IP address is greater than 0, or the length is greater than 0, then we know we're connected. Otherwise, we're not connected. Just be careful with that routine in development mode, because as you see there, I make the test to say, hey, I am actually running on a mobile before I do this test. Okay, so that's that little test is connected to make sure that we are connected to a network at that before we call the function. Okay, so the little create random job, it's just the URL to my server, and basically all these requests follow the same basic pattern. We define two variables of type com.http request and com.http response, set up the request. I'm sending some JSON and it's a post, and then I'm sending up some data to create the random job. That rep code, which I use in my more production application, it's just to enable me to download or create a random job that belongs to this device or this customer rep. Yes, that's why I'm passing that argument, and then I just get the response back. And with all HTTP calls, test the status code, and if the HTTP status is 200, then that's a successful call, and we indicate that we've created the job. Any other value other than 200, then it's a fail. Okay, and so we should send it to false and return it back. So that's the create random job. But the main synchronization process is coming through this execute routine, and that's where it tests if we're connected, and then it refreshes the product, customer, job header before setting up our jobs and deleting our old jobs. So I'll look at the refresh product. It's very similar. Refresh product and refresh customer, very similar. Basically, we've got our URL, do the request. So there's no arguments being passed up. We're just saying do this request and get the response back. And if it's greater, if it's 200, then it's okay. Otherwise, we exit with an error. And then we take the response and parse it into our JSON. It's a JSON string, and then we parse it and then use the JSON methods to parse it into the 4GL record. So it ends up being parsed into this record here. How did I know to create that particular type? Well, the answer is you can use the proposed types. What I'm going to do is uncomment that proposed type method. I'm going to run the call again, and And in the output, we see that it's dumped to standard output the type that was proposed for the record. And so when I was developing, it was a case of then just copying and pasting that into my record definition. So PR barcode, PR code, PR underscore name, etc. So that's how I've created that type. And then that record gets populated with the pars and the two FGL call. So it turns it into the JSON object, then it passes it into the record, and then it's simply a case of looping through that 4GL record and for every value inserting it into the product table. So that's how I refresh the product table. Note I delete everything beforehand and then loop through the responses and insert into the product. What I'm going to do is just run that again, and yes, I'll display the string that gets returned this time. So instead of displaying the record type, just show you what string actually gets returned from the synchronization process. It's normally quite a big long string. Yep, there we are. So that's what's coming back as our JSON string for the product table, and then this code is parsing that JSON string into the 4GL record variable, and then iterating through the 4GL, well, it's actually an array, 4GL array variable, iterating through the length of that 4GL array, and for every record here, inserting it into the product table. So that process occurs for the customer and product tables. The job header, refreshing the job header is very similar, although instead of refreshing all the jobs, I'm only interested in the new ones. So I get all the job details, but then I go through and test to see if it's in the system already. So if it's in the database already, then I just iterate through the loop and go to the next record in the loop. If it's complete, I also go to the next record in the loop. So I'm only interested in the new jobs, and then I insert into job header those type of records. Again, you'll see I've commented out the proposed type, but that's how I've built up this particular record here. The one that's different is going the other way, where we're sending the jobs from the device back up to our servers. So I've got a nice complex record. So for our job customer, all our job lines, our notes, our photos, our timesheets, all the information on the header. Selecting the detail, so I set up a number of cursors to select the detail. And then I basically iterate through each of the jobs that have been completed and do a big post back up to the server. So content type, application JSON, set method post, and then based on my variable which I've populated, I stringify it as a JSON string and then do a big text request up to the servers. And then check the status, and if the status is 200, it's okay. Otherwise, something gone wrong, and we pop up an error and exit out at that point. So the key thing there was really getting the record structure right and populating that record structure with what's in our database already. So there's my JSON. There's my 4GL record structure that corresponds to the JSON object that I'm having to send up. Now, the important thing to note is that the case of the record and field names is important. So my process at the other end was expecting capital letters in the names, so I had to make sure they were capitals there as well. Now, the cool thing about this is how we do photos. If I come down to the photo record, if I what I'm doing is getting the photo data and putting it into that JP underscore image is a byte, and I'm reading the photo file into that byte variable. There it is, JP underscore image byte. And reading the photo image from the file name we've got in at the moment into that byte variable. And then what happens is the JSON string process does a base 64 encoding of that and sends it up to the servers. Just be careful though when you get into the business of taking photos. That significantly impacts the amount of data you're sending up. So although I've got them all occurring inside this loop, if this is a production application, I might tweak this and do the photos in a separate transmission so that we can keep the size small and split everything into smaller buckets rather than sending everything in one big hit. Finally, in the job sync routine, the last thing it does, it's not really syncing, but it deletes any of the old jobs. So delete from job detail, job note, photo, timesheet, job header, if the record meets some certain criteria. And that basically criteria says it's got X for complete and it was signed more than 7 days ago. So we're saying if the job is complete and it's more than 7 days old, then we're going to delete it from our device. Okay, so that's the basic synchronization process. You'll find that there's certain patterns you repeat over and over again. I found with the product and customer, I was repeating the same pattern, and then if I was doing more posts, I would, when the send jobs, again, I'd have that same pattern, and it is a case of your request variable and your response variable, setting the URL, setting the header and the methods, doing a request, and getting a response and checking that it's 200. Okay. And the other thing and just to reiterate, use that proposed type method to figure out what your 4GL record structure should be inside that function.